Today's daf is daf vav, and we're going to begin with Omar Marzutra, which if you count down from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down. Lo Amaron, when do we allow burying the dead if a person died, as Rava had established at the top of the Amud, on the second day of Yontif, what we call Yontif Cheni Shel Golios? That only applies, says Marzutra, Ella Be'ishtahi. Ishtahi is a conjugation of the word shehiyah. Shehiyah means there was a delay. It took a while after the death to bury the dead. And therefore, we're afraid that the corpse will begin to decompose and it will have a foul odor if we delay the kvura any longer. So therefore, we allow the kvura to take place on Yontif Sheni Shel Golios, have a lowish toy. However, if the deceased died just recently, and there's no chashash that of sirachon, that there will be a foul odor as the body disintegrates, is machinale, then we can delay the kvura until after Yontif. And Rav Ashi disagrees. Rav Ashi Omar, just 1 second, I have to take care of this technological thing, sorry. Rav Ashi disagrees. Rav Ashi Omar, Afal Gav Delo Ishtoi, even though he just died, and there's no reason to suspect that the body will decompose and experience this sirachon situation, nevertheless, Nami Lo Machinale. We have a kavod for the mess, and we will bury the dead on Yontif Sheni Shel Golios. My timer, why does Rav Ashi allow violating the Yontif? After all, Kvura entails digging a grave, which is a violation of Meleches Choresh, which is one of the Melachas of the 39 Melachas. And the answer is Yontif Sheni Legabi Mes Kechol Shavyu Rabbanan. When the Rabbanan instituted Yontif Sheni, anything that's relevant to the mess and covered a mess was not included in the establishment of Yontif. Afil lemegez leglima ulemegez le'asa. Even if it means to cut cloth in order to produce and manufacture tachrichim, shrouds for the dead, or to cut, they used to have a minhag apparently back in the day to cut hadassim, which is called an asa, that we remember from Sukkah, in order to put it on the mita, and that was covered a mess. All this, which entails a host of violating malachas, is mutter on the Yontif Sheni for the sake of a mess, because Yontif Sheni legabi mes kechol shavyu rabbana. I remember once in a shir, my Rebbe said, Rav Soloveitchik said that when the Rabbanon instituted Yontif Sheni, they had, so to speak, a checklist. And they would check off what prohibitions would apply on Yontif Sheni Shel Golios. 1, 2, 3. When they got to mess, they didn't include it in the original enactment of the Surim of Yontif Sheni. Amar Avinu, ha'idna, in our time, Dika Chabare. Chabare was a nation that was very anti-Semitic and very attacking of the Jewish people, and they forced the Jewish people to do work for them, labor for them. Is Chayshinon, if we would go ahead and bury the dead on Yontif, that would be understood by the Chabarim as a declaration that we don't have an Isur Malacha. And they would further force us to do Malacha on Yontif. And if we claimed, well, today is our holiday, we can't do the Malacha, they would say, what are you talking about? You just went out there and bury the dead. So therefore, we will not bury the dead, even though it's a loss of kavod hames. We will forfeit that kavod hames for the sake of observing Yontif, because otherwise the Chabarim would force us to violate the Yontif with all different kinds of malachas, and we would end up without Yontif. So for the sake of observing Yontif Shein Shel Golius, we will now postpone the burial of the dead. I would add the following comment. If a Jew dies on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, then we allowed burying him through a nachri, through the Goyin, Amir al-Nachri. So in this case, we don't want the Jews to get involved in violating Yontif Sheni, but I would still assume, I hope I'm not misleading anybody, that you can tell a guy to do the Tvura. But in the absence of a guy, there's no guy available for the burial, you would not personally, as Jews, get involved in the burial. And now we get to the halacha l'maisa with regard to the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. We have machlokas amoraim here. Avina v'Yosef kame de Rav Ashi. So Avina was in the presence of Rav Ashi. V'shnei yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. On the first of the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Now, these 2 days of Rosh Hashanah fell on that particular year on a Thursday and a Friday. Now, as you know, and there's an entire chapter in Beitza, which we'll get to later on, dedicated to what's called Erev Tavshilin. And that means that when Yontif falls out on Erev Shabbos, you want to prepare on Yontif for Shabbos, you make an Erev Tavshilin. Chazye, Ravina saw Rav Ashi, Davi Otzav, he was upset. Amalei. So Ravina turns to Rav Ashi, he says, Amai Otzav Mar. Why is my master so upset? Amalei. So Rav Ashi responded, Delo Osive Eruve Tavshilin. I forgot to set up an Erev Tavshilin on Erev Yontif. And now I won't be able to cook on Yontif for the sake of Shabbos. I don't have an Erev Tavshilin. Amalei. So Ravina responded to try to cheer him up. Velosiv Mar Ha'idna. Why can't you make an Erev Tavshilin now? Meaning on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And then what you'll do is you'll set up the Mimanavshach, right? Because we're assuming that one of the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah is Chol and the other is Kodesh. We just simply don't know out in the Makomos or Chokim, out in Kodesh, we don't know. And Lo Amar Rav, Milo Amar Rav, do we not have a statement, a ruling of Rav with regard to Yontif Sheni Shel Golios? Meiniach Odom Erev Tavshil Miyontif L'Chavero Umasna. He could set up an Erev Tavshilin from one day to the next with a Tanai. If today is Chol, then let my Erev be an Erev, like any Erev Tavshilin, which you set up an Erev Yontif. If today is Kodesh, then my Erev should be totally meaningless. And tomorrow, which is Chol, I can cook from today till, Friday to Shabbos. So Mimanavshach, I'm allowed to cook. Omalei, so Rav Ashi responded, Amor di Amar Rava, that's only B'shnei Yom Tovim Shel Golius, but B'shnei Yom Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah mi Amar. We don't find that Rava went as far as allowing a Mimanavshach with regard to the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, because as opposed to Yontif Sheni Shel Golius, which we observe mitzad Safek, in the case of Rosh Hashanah, we observe 2 days, the Torah's Vada, not the Torah's Safek. It's considered a Kedusha Achas, and it's a Yom HaRichta. So the Mimanavshach, the Tanai of Rava, would not be applicable to the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Hence, I'm upset about the fact that I omitted setting up an Erev Tavshilin on that Wednesday of Erev Rosh Hashanah. For Amri Nardoi, so Ravina turns to Rav Ashi and he says, what about the statement of Nardoi? Nardoi means the Chachamim that came from Nardo in Bavel. And they said, Af Beitza, even the case of an egg that was laid on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Muteres, you're allowed to eat it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So it means that Nardoi accepted the opinion that Rosh Hashanah, like any Yontif Shel Golios, is Shtei Kedushos. it's not considered vadai, but rather a suffix. And it means that he equated the dinim of Rosh Hashanah with the dinim of Yontif Cheni Shel Golius as far as the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, if the first day of Rosh Hashanah is Chol, then the Beitza was Nolda on Erev Yontif. And if the first day was Kodesh, then today is Chol, the second day of Rosh Hashanah is Chol, and for sure you're allowed to eat the egg. And if that be the case, we'll apply the same logic to Erevin. And he can set up an Erev Tafshilin on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Mivanavsha. Amalei Rav Mordechai was the Talmud of Rav Ashi, and he explained to Ravina that he shouldn't object to Rav Ashi based on Nardoi, because Beferish Amalei Mar, I heard explicitly from my Rebbe Rav Ashi, Delo Savarlok in Nardoi. He did not accept the view of Nardoi. He holds that a Beitza that was laid on the first day of Rosh Hashanah is also on the second day. And the reason for that is because the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are considered Yom HaRichta, one long day of Yontif. And therefore, if we apply that to Erev Tafshilin, you cannot set up an Erev Halatanah. Itmar, we learned in the Beis Medrash with regard to an Efrach, that's a little chickie that was hatched on Yontif. Efrach Shenolad, in other words, it broke through the egg, the shell of the egg on Yontif. Rav Amar Asur, you're not allowed to eat the Efrach, mean shechted and eat it. Ushmuel v'itema Rav Yochanan Amar Mutar. Rav Amar Asur Mukzahu. Because as he entered into Yontif, Ben Hashmashos, the Efrach was not Omed Lachila. You couldn't eat it. It only was hatched on Yontif. Shmuel v'itema Rav Yochanan Amar Mutar, Holu Matiris Atzmo Bishchita. Now we're introducing a brand new principle called Matir Atzmo B'Shchita, which means the following: that although it's true, and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan cannot deny, that during Bein Hashmashos, entering into Yontif, this Efrach was certainly Muktzah. However, there's a Matir on the Muktzah. What is the Matir on the Muktzah? And that is Shchita. Once the Efrach was born on Yontif, now it lends itself to Shchita. And since it lends itself to Shchita, we remove the Isur Muktzah. And it's a kind of an Agav halacha, meaning Agav, the fact that you're allowed to shecht and Shchita is muteres, you're allowed, therefore, to eat the egg as well. Just 1 second. Forget about the egg. I'm sorry. I mentioned the egg, but that's going to come up later. Right now, we're talking about the status of the Efrach. Again, everybody agrees, nobody denies that going into Yontif, the Efrach was not Omed Lachila, therefore it's Muktzah. But the question is, now that it hatched and it had a Leda, can we apply the following rule? That once you're allowed to shecht it and eat it, then the Isur Muktzah is completely removed. And in the commentary here on the bottom, he says, Notzra kan mitzius chadosha. There's a brand new entity here that didn't exist on Erev Yontif. Shenefcha midomem l'chai. That until it was born, it was a domem, it was an inanimate object, and now it became a chai. And therefore, we cannot impose the Isur Muktzah or the Isur Nolad. That's called Hol Umatir Atzmo B'Shchita. Yesterday it wasn't royal Shchita, it was a domain. Today it became a chai, it hatched, and you're allowed to shecht it. And if it's a birya chadosha, transforming itself from a domain to a chai, then you can't talk about Isur Muktzah because it's a birya chadosha. It's like we say about tshuva. He was a chote, but now he's a Baal Tshuva. He's a new person, so you can't hold him responsible from the actions of another person in a mashal. Now, Rav here says that if you look at Rabbi Yehuda's Shita Muktzah, Rabbi Yehuda's Machmir in Muktzah, and I accept Rabbi Yehuda's Shita Muktzah. And now Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan are responding to Rav, and they're saying, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we could be matir the afroach that was born on Yom Tov because of a whole matir asma b'shchita, which means that it's a birya chadosha and it's not shaykh to muktzah. Amri le Rav Kahana Rav Asi Rav. Why do you say that the afroach that was hatched on Yom Tov is asur v'chima ben zela egel shenolad b'Yom Tov? What happens if a cow gives birth to a calf, or as the Brits would say, a calf, right, on Yom Tov? Everybody agrees that you're allowed to eat the calf, and the afroach should have the exact identical status as the calf that was born to the para, to the cow. Amalu Rav says in response that in the case of the egel that was born on Yom Tov, you're allowed to eat it hoel v'muchan agav imo b'shchita. You're allowed to shech the para and remove the egel, do a surgical operation, remove the calf from the kishkes, the insides, the intestines of the para. And in that case, it's what's called a ben pkur, and you don't even need shchita. Why? Because we assume the egel until its birth is like gerech imo. It's like another limb of its mother. And once you shech the mother, that shchita is effective even for the egel inside its me'ayim. So the egel itself was already prepared for achila, that achana ben hashmashos entering into Yom Tov, because the mother was re'uyel shchita, the cow, and therefore when the egel is born on Yom Tov, there's no isur mukta, and you're allowed to shecht it and eat it. But a frach, which is born on Yom Tov, was never royal achila before Yom Tov, and therefore the isur mukta is chal. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi come back to add another kash against Rav. Uma, and what distinction do you have, Bain, meaning this afrach zeh le'egel shenolad min hatreifa? We know that you can shecht an egel that was born on Yom Tov in all circumstances. There's no qualification and no limitation. So imagine a case where the mother, meaning the cow, is a treifa. And if you would shech the mother, meaning the cow, the shchita would not be matir l'achila, because you can't be matir a treifa with shchita, to eat the treifa. And nevertheless, the egel, which is not a treifa, you're allowed to eat. So in other words, if let's say you shecht the mother and you find the egel, your logic, Rav, in this case is not going to apply, because your logic is based on the fact that hoil umatir asmo b'shchita, meaning that there would be a shchita on the mother. But in this case of a treifa, you can't check the mother. So you don't have your svar of hoil. And yet, we have an unqualified halacha that an egel that's born on Yom Tov, you're allowed to shecht it. How so? Shasik Rav. And Rav didn't have an answer. He didn't respond to Rav Kahana and Rav Asi on their question. But Omar Rabba, he came Rav Yosef, my time is Shasik Rav. I don't understand why Rav was so baffled and overwhelmed by this question. Lemalahu, I have a simple answer to this question, to differentiate between an egel that's born to a mother, a cow that's a treifa, and the case of a frog. I understand very well why the egel is not mukta. Hoel umuchan agav imo leklavim. What does this mean? That true, the mother cow, the para, is a treifa, and she's not omedes lachilas adam, because we are enjoined from eating the flesh of a treifa. However, if the mother dies, then we can take its flesh and feed it to the dogs. And we could do so even for the egel that's inside the mother's belly. And therefore, there's no isur mukta that's chal on the egel, even as far as achilas adam is concerned. Because we're holding now, the Gemara is going to question this premise, that muchan leklavim avi muchan liadam. That which is designated on Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov for feeding the dogs is also muchan liado. But the afrach is inside a shell. That's not omid l'klavim. You don't feed an afrach that's not born to a klavim. And therefore the dinim of muktzah chal during bein hashmashos, and it becomes also for the entire day.